Masterclass portion of Polatschek's Advanced Studies for the Clarinet. Today we'll be going through Etude number 5 after Symphony No. 1 by Dmitri Shostakovich. Now just a little bit of a personal side note, I love Shostakovich. Ever since the first time I got the chance to play principal on Shostakovich 5 in undergrad, his music has really impacted me on a spiritual level. The intensity, the emotion, the relentless urgency of it all, it really speaks to an audience on a different level. And I'm really happy that Polatschek included it as part of these studies. This particular symphony I've not played, but the excerpt I have worked on, so this is going to be really fun to work on as an entire piece. Now to give you a quick snapshot, Dmitri Shostakovich wrote his first symphony as part of a graduation project at the Leningrad Conservatory, which basically means that he earned the equivalent of a college music degree. And I don't know about you, but I certainly was not writing iconic symphonies at the age of 18. Just one more reason why Shostakovich is fierce. In the symphony, we have a conventional 4-movement model despite the scherzo being second and the slow movement being third. That in itself for the time was very unconventional, but kind of paved the way for many newer composers to take liberties as well. Throughout, Shostakovich found ways to play within this form, producing musical events in unexpected orders, interrupting, linking, and reverting to new ideas. Now for the sake of this etude, we can look to the contour of the clarinet solo in the 4th movement, where the mood shifts gears and we begin to explore the ways in which the study pays tribute to the original excerpt. Now for your own purposes, I would definitely suggest taking some time to listen to the entire symphony. I think in doing so, you will be able to perform this adaptation with a better understanding of how this excerpt is played in the larger context of the entire symphony. For anyone interested, you can find my favorite recording of this piece at the end of the masterclass. All that being said, let's get into the music. Now starting off, this etude is written the exact same way as the actual orchestral excerpt from Symphony No. 1. Given this, I would perform this on B-flat clarinet and suggest a tempo of maybe 160 plus, since we are given an indication of allegro molto. However, you can certainly choose to perform this at a slower tempo, that's totally okay. For me, I think it's a little more fun to rehearse this in the style of the original work, but for the sake of consistency and getting as much out of this study as possible, we always want to go for quality over quantity. Now, rhythmically speaking, this etude really depends on the player's ability to maintain a good, solid tempo without losing time on the 16th rest throughout. Despite the simple meter of 2/4, I think we're faced with a really huge task and a lot of moving 16 notes that require us to rely less on the score once we actually perform this. Practicing, set your metronome to a tempo that's slow enough that you can get every single note right. Make sure that your subdivision is set to the 16 notes. You can make that bigger as time goes on. And then eventually I would start to feel this in a 1. Try to think bigger ideas. Once you start the etude, it doesn't stop until the end. We're just thinking one big continuous long idea, not micromanaging every single little measure. Now in terms of the way that this etude is structured, we are basically given the original excerpt in the first system of the page, and then we have a very extended sequence of the same idea until we reach the end. Generally speaking, I would suggest taking some time to play your chromatic scales, beginning on every single note of the instrument as a warm-up, ascending, descending. I do 5 notes up and down. Because the study really depends on a fluent approach to this particular scale, being able to play this quickly and interchangeably between any different interval is really going to pay off. So, as I said, I like to just do 5 notes up and down, starting on low E. And so on until I get to the very top, and then I work my way down if I'm feeling zesty that day. If not, ascending is totally fine. Just make sure that you're always working on these types of scales, your chromatic scales. I know that they seem really easy, but when you're given something like this, and you have to start on any note and just be able to cherry pick everything that you know, it really does pay off. Now, starting in measure 1, we have 2 measures of chromatic buildup, and then we are given 2 measures of descending material that leads us into a slightly different version of the same idea, as I mentioned before. Between the use of ascending major sevenths and descending tritones, the technical demands of this study quickly add up to a rather challenging assortment of motivic ideas and demands. All this being said, I highly suggest working for quality over quantity, as I mentioned before as well. In the early learning aspects of this etude, taking some time to really understand your tendencies, whether it's finger work, articulation, rhythm, it'll all allow you to assess exactly what you need to work on. That way you can make this flow as easily as possible, as beautifully as possible, as musically as possible at your peak tempo. Slower practice from day 1 will always be the best way to give you control over the course of your learning experience. It builds muscle memory and it builds confidence. As mentioned in all of my other videos, taking some time from the get-go for your fingerings and your roadmap is going to be imperative, invaluable to the success of learning this entire etude. There's instances where we have to go from left to right, right to left very quickly with our pinkies. There's flipping, fork fingerings. Over time we get used to seeing these different patterns, but if you're new to this, then I would definitely suggest taking time to mark all this stuff in. It's a good way to practice without the clarinet, and it really allows you to understand the piece before you can start playing with the clarinet as well. Given the way the music is written, I would absolutely suggest exaggerating all the written crescendi markings. That way you really feel like you have plenty of room to get softer as you descend from each forte. Generally speaking, we really only want to have 2 colors on our palette for the majority of this etude. As a listener, I really want to be able to hear the intensity come and go from the beginning to the very end until we reach that fortissimo 3 measures before the end. As I said, there's really only 2 dynamic markings with some decay and growth in between. But if I'm looking at my volume dial on a radio or a speaker, I should be at either 3 or maybe a 6, and then at the very end of 9. So we only have 3 different options to choose from this whole thing. So really try to figure out how to structure this in that specific context, and I think you'll be all set to go. Regarding breathing choices, this is going to be also very important to think of as you're planning how to pace. Since all of the opportunities to breathe will be located on 16th breaths, you may feel as if you are stacking your air, and you'll also need time to exhale before taking a deep breath. This can be very common for music that is really technical and provides little opportunities to breathe. We sometimes need to exhale before taking a new breath to replace the old air. Otherwise, we stack our air and then it gets very taxing to get through the phrase, and we can sometimes feel a little dizzy. It can feel uncomfortable. So making sure that you are getting through your entire phrase, that way when you do take a breath, it's a full one. I think that's the best way to plan your breaths. Don't take too many, don't take too few. Understand your tendencies and the way that you're going to pace these out and mark them in for the benefit of the overall piece. In measure 43, moving ahead, we have an instance where we will need to flip between the rated F-sharp 5 and F-sharp natural that follows, since we are approaching from a longer C-sharp 5 fingering just before. Similar to etude number 4, where we had some flipping. Generally speaking, using the fort fingering for F-sharp is typically the better option, but its accessibility really depends on the note that follows. So given what we're working right here, we have an instance where we're going to want to flip because the note before it is a C-sharp. So this is a longer fingering. We can't possibly go up and use this fork, so we have to use the regular F-sharp, which is just 1, 2, 3, 2. And then we have to flip. We We go through the rest of the measure, and then we can start to use our fourth fingering, since it's just meandering between an F, F sharp, G, F sharp, and an F. And then we go to a longer B natural fingering. So things to think about as you're considering when do I flip, is it okay? I think it really depends on if you're approaching or coming down to a longer note. If that's the case, then you do have to flip. If not, then I would definitely use the four fingerings. Now for these whirling tritone groupings in measure 45, I would strive to connect every interval with the air. Always pushing forward, always giving, never taking. You know, we really need the air to power through this section, as with the whole etude. These lead into expanded passage of the opening material at measure 49, where the attention to dynamics will be very important to the excitement of the music. It's very hot and cold. We're going from piano to forte. I think this section needs to sound really manic, a little crazy, just as Shostakovich's music kind of does at times. So try to think of the sound of maybe like a bigger orchestra. You know, pretend like you're playing in the middle of the woodwind section and try to use that excitement to fuel this page. Finishing the etude, make sure that we begin measure 73 at a true piano. That way the fortissimo at the very end of the etude provides a definitive ending. Since this is the only instance of this dynamic level, I think it's really important to make sure that all marked fortes preceding this final moment at the end are not any louder in intensity. You know, I think when you're thinking about dynamics, you want to look at your extremes and then pace and structure within that context. Sometimes we may play too loud, and then by the time we get to the peak of our phrase at the end of the piece, you know, we've kind of already given all the gas to the car and there's nothing left to give. There's nowhere left to go. So we also want to understand, you know, how soft we can play given our setup, our equipment, you know, what's the reed giving us that day, how are we going to have to adjust. I think as clarinets we're always having to adjust based on our equipment and, you know, A, B, C, D, Z. So all things to think about as you're thinking about dynamics. You know, all these things contribute to the overall spectrum of sound that you're going to give on a particular day. And with that, we've reached the end of etude number 5 in Dmitri Polatschek's advanced studies for the clarinet. I hope that you've gained a bit of knowledge from this masterclass, and I hope that it prepares you for an amazing performance in the future. If there's any additional questions on this etude, please feel free to comment below. Send me an email, I'll get back to you very soon. In the meantime, thank you so much for clicking and watching. I'll see you next time for etude number 6. Happy practicing, and don't forget to hit subscribe on the way out. See ya.